The cold wind was a beast, roaring through the narrow streets of the small American town. It rattled the windows of diners and made the neon lights flicker, their colors bleeding across the wet pavement in a desperate attempt to bring warmth to the freezing night. Outside one of these diners, a man was folded into the shadows against the brick wall. His clothes were torn and thin, his hair a tangled mess, and his face was a roadmap of scars from a war no one else could see. His legs, useless and still, rested on the footpads of a battered wheelchair, trapping him there. His eyes, hollow and empty, held the reflection of countless nights spent with nothing but the cold for a blanket. He was the kind of man people trained themselves not to see, a person the world had already judged, labeled, and discarded. But inside that diner, behind the steamy glass, a young woman's heart was about to rewrite his entire story. The waitress, Emily, was no stranger to hardship herself. At only 24, life had taught her heavy lessons, the kind that settle deep in your bones and make you old before your time. She worked double shifts, a constant ballet of balancing trays heavy with steaming plates and coffee cups, all while wearing a smile that rarely reached her tired eyes. Inside, her mind raced with worries about the stack of bills on her kitchen counter and her younger brother's school fees, a number that always seemed impossibly out of reach. Yet, no matter how weary she felt, Emily carried a quiet strength within her. It was a strength that allowed her to look past the dirt and despair of the man outside and see something most people ignored: his humanity. Every single evening, after serving her last customer and wiping down the last table, she would step out into the biting cold. In her hands, she would carry a steaming bowl of the diner's soup of the day and a thick slice of bread. She never asked for his name, and he never offered it. Their entire relationship was built on this simple, silent ritual. All she knew was that his eyes, though clouded with a deep and abiding sorrow, would soften just a little each time she placed the food before him. A flicker of life would return to them, if only for a moment. As days bled into weeks, Emily started to notice the whispers from the other customers. She heard them from the booths behind her back as she refilled coffee mugs. Some rolled their eyes at her simple act of compassion, muttering under their breath about how helping beggars only encouraged them to be lazy. Others would shake their heads with a look of pity, convinced the man had wasted his life and had only himself to blame for his miserable situation. But Emily never let their quiet judgments change her heart. She remembered too many nights from her own childhood, when she and her brother had gone to bed with the sharp pain of hunger in their stomachs. They would wait for their mother to come home from her own thankless job, only to find out later she had skipped her own meal so they could eat. Emily knew hunger. She knew what hopelessness felt like, and she knew that the smallest kindness, a single warm meal, could sometimes feel like a miracle. The man outside, though physically frail, had an aura of mystery about him. His scars hinted at struggles far more complex than a life on the streets. His silence was not born of pride, but of a pain so deep it had stolen his words. And though he sat quietly by the diner window, watching the blur of life move past him, his presence was a powerful, undeniable thing. Slowly, Emily's small act of kindness grew into a silent bond that neither of them spoke of, but both of them cherished. On nights when heavy snow blanketed the streets and muffled the sounds of the town, she would slip him extra bread rolls, wrapped carefully in napkins to keep them warm. When fierce storms rattled the diner windows, she would pour his soup a little fuller than usual, pretending not to see her manager's disapproving glare from across the room. Then came the night that changed everything. The winter had been long and brutal, and it had taken its toll on him. He looked weaker than she had ever seen him, his hands trembling so violently that he could barely lift the spoon to his mouth. A wave of concern washed over Emily. Without a second thought, she knelt beside him on the cold pavement, her own hands steadying the bowl. Her eyes, full of genuine worry, met his. For the first time, he looked directly at her, not with the guarded, broken expression of a stranger, but with the immense weight of someone carrying a secret too heavy to bear alone. His lips, chapped and pale, parted. In a low, hoarse voice that sounded like it hadn't been used in years, he spoke 4 words that stunned her to her core. "I am a billionaire." At first, Emily thought he was delirious, that the cold and hunger had finally clouded his mind. It had to be a fever dream. Yet his gaze was perfectly steady, his tone firm and clear. He began to tell her a story of a life she couldn't possibly imagine. He spoke of towering glass office buildings that scraped the sky, of luxury cars that hummed with power, and of magazine covers that had hailed him as one of America's most brilliant and successful entrepreneurs. But he explained that in his relentless chase for more wealth, he had lost everything that truly mattered. He had lost his family, he had lost trust, and he had lost love. Betrayed by the people he thought were closest to him, broken by the crushing pressures of greed and ambition, he had simply walked away from it all. He chose the anonymity of the streets over the emptiness of his gilded life. His scars, he revealed, were not just from physical fights, but from brutal wars waged in boardrooms and within his own tormented soul. Emily sat frozen on the sidewalk, the world spinning around her. Her heart pounded in her chest as the truth settled in. The man she had been feeding every day out of simple compassion was someone who once controlled more money than she could ever dream of. But what struck her most was not his lost fortune or his spectacular fall from grace. It was the raw gratitude in his voice. He confessed that in all his years of success, surrounded by people who claimed to care for him, he had never once felt the touch of genuine, unconditional kindness. Not until she, a struggling waitress, had placed a simple bowl of soup before him with no expectation of getting anything in return. From that night on, the dynamic between them began to shift. The man, slowly regaining his strength and his will to live, started visiting the diner, not as a faceless figure huddled outside, but as a quiet patron inside. He would sit at a small table in the corner, nursing a cup of coffee, his eyes following Emily as she worked, observing her quiet resilience and tireless spirit. Unknown to her, he began to set plans into motion. Hidden behind the shadows of his chosen humility, he still possessed vast resources and connections. He decided that this young woman who had seen him as a human being when he was at his lowest would be the one whose life he would change forever. Weeks later, an unmarked envelope was slipped under her apartment door. Emily found it when she returned home, her body aching after another long shift. Inside was not just a letter, but a stack of documents that would completely alter the course of her life. The billionaire had quietly paid off all her debts, every last penny. He had set up a trust fund that would secure her brother's education all the way through college. And in the most unbelievable gesture of all, he had arranged for her to become the new owner of the very diner where she had worked so tirelessly. She sank to the floor and wept that night. Her tears were not just for the money or the sudden lifting of her immense burdens, but for the profound realization that her simple, repetitive act of kindness had rippled outwards in a way she could never have predicted. The man disappeared soon after, leaving no trace behind except for the incredible legacy of his gratitude. But the diner he left in Emily's hands became something more than just a place to eat. It became a beacon of hope in the small town. She continued to serve meals to anyone who walked in hungry, never turning away those who had nothing to pay with. And in every bowl of soup she served, in every act of compassion she showed, she felt the invisible presence of the man who had been broken but had, in turn, shown her and the entire town that true wealth has nothing to do with money. It is measured by the healing you bring to other hearts. The tale of the waitress and the billionaire serves as a powerful reminder that sometimes the richest treasures in life are not found locked away in banks or traded in boardrooms, but are discovered in the simple, quiet acts of kindness that reveal the true immeasurable wealth of the human soul.